Right.
Oh.
This is Fidelity by William Wordsworth.
Yep.
And just the topic already, you can kind of just predict that it's going to be about, someone being faithful or maybe being unfaithful, just depending on, whatever your
Because
perspective.
that's fidelity, like you said, is faithfulness to a cause or a belief.
Or a person. Right. So the poem starts out, and this poem, mind you, is more of a story almost. It's like a short story, but it is poetic. And it starts off with a barking sound that the shepherd hears, as a cry as of a dog or fox. A shepherd can be a person who tends to sheep, or it can also be like spiritual guidance. Like the Lord is my shepherd, for example. Yeah. And the cry of a dog or fox. Usually for shepherds, in the term of that, a shepherd that herds sheep, dogs or foxes are usually negative because those are the things that go after their sheep.
Right.
And it just kind of continues, and it's really ominous, and he's, looking around, and a specific line is, he halts and searches with his eyes. And I think it's interesting how he specifically searches with his eyes.
Yeah.
Versus, like, his ears or, like, his heart or whatever. Specifically with his eyes.
Imagery is really big in this poem because Wordsworth actually doesn't use very many literary devices. There's not many metaphors or personification. It's just the images that help bring out the story and show you what point he's really trying to get at. Now, doing the background information, we both found that Wordsworth was really into nature. He loved long hikes, and you can definitely see this through this poem, where he talks about some diction choice, like the covert green, talking about
the break of ferns,
the scattered rocks.
Mm-hmm.
Just he's definitely painting a picture in the head of the scene of what's going on, and that's what he does.
It's very descriptive, and I mean this is seen throughout all of his works, not just in this poem. Mm-hmm. And it continues on where it introduces one of what we'll find is one of the main, I guess, characters of the poem. And it's that the dog is not of mountain breed. And in this poem, the dog is capitalized. Right. So it just sort of signifies and just enhances how...
the importance of the dog.
Right, the importance of the animal itself. And it continues on. It says, unusual in its cry. Just the noise that the dog makes are very unusual. And he just thinks, what is this creature doing here? So he's just a shepherd that's going around, along, just tending his sheep. He's among the rocks. It's in the mountains.
He's up in the mountains. It's very uncommon for a dog, which he regards as a pet because, like you said,
it's not of a mountain breed either. This dog doesn't belong here.
So he might be someone's pet, but he looks around. He says he listens for a whistle, or a shout, like someone's calling for the dog, or maybe someone's out there doing something, but he doesn't hear anything, which is odd, which adds on to the ominous tone of no one's around, there's this random dog, I wonder what happened.
Right.
How'd it get here?
And the whole idea of fidelity still isn't clear. You're still kind of going along, seeing what's going to happen. And he just uses more description just to kind of describe the area that he's in. He says it was a cove with a huge recess that keeps till June, December snow. And just, describes a slightly tarn below in the bosom of Helvellyn.
Yeah, so that was the first two stanzas, and now there's a third stanza. And in the third stanza, it kind of gets a little foreshadowing of some bad event that happened, because he says, he's talking about that in the environment they're surrounded, and it says, it was a cove, a huge recess, and a lofty precipice, which precipice means...
precipice.
Oh, precipice? It actually, the definition is a very steep rock or cliff, which very steep means deadly, dangerous.
And it says far in the bosom of Helvellyn, and Helvellyn is another word for basically hell, just based on the time period that we're in. Well, that the author is pretending to write in and everything. So.
Right. And the other choice of the word remote, he says remote from public road or dwelling. It's like, he's definitely foreshadowing some negative event that might have occurred.
Right. He's just talking about the remoteness of the land. But he continues on where he's just following this dog. And it says, there sometimes doth a leaping fish. sent through the tarn on a lonely cheer. The crags repeat the raven's croak. It continues on. He talks about how thither the rainbow comes the cloud. That how there's a rainbow, the clouds are blowing
It's
by.
emphasizing that there's no humans. There's ravens, there's fish, there's clouds, but there's no people.
Right, and it's also painting the picture of really calm and a serene,
Yes.
you know.
Yes,
So you're just, he's just kind of just taking you along very casually and very calmly. But in the 5th stanza, he's just following the dog as quickly as he may. Not far had he gone before he found a human skeleton on the ground.
Dun, dun, dun.
And this right here is the tone change in this whole poem. Because, he's just following this dog throughout this whole, remote, beautiful place in the mountains. And all of a sudden, boom, the dog, leads him to a skeleton.
Which also, that we see the significance of the fact that the dog went to the shepherd and then came back to the skeleton, showing, which later we'll talk about more, the faithfulness of the dog, the fact that he is trying to get the man to come to the dead skeleton, and you wonder what the relationship is there.
And the irony is that the shepherd is the one who's supposed to tend the sheep. If you're talking about, spiritually, the shepherd is spiritual guidance, and it's the fact that the shepherd is being guided by a dog. The shepherd is being guided by another entity. And it continues. The appalled discoverer, the discoverer is the shepherd, with a sigh looks around to learn the history. And then it continues on with just a description of the area around him and what he sees when he looks around.
The words abrupt and perilous, showing how
the man had fallen.
Yep.
The place of fear. And so it's interesting to know that the shepherd, how he looks around to learn the history. And how all he has to do is look around,
observe the environment,
and he can understand what happened.
Tying that back to Wordsworth, he does this in a lot of his poems. He shows a form of connection between man and nature. That if you just are aware of your surroundings while you're in nature, you can learn so much more from the nature. In this case, it's kind of a sad thing. What he's learning is the fact that those look like perilous steep rocks, and there's a dead body. He must have fell. It just shows the relationship and the knowledge you can gain from the nature around you.
Right. And then the next few stanzas just talk about, I guess, the history that he learns.
He wonders what happened.
Exactly, is that the man had fallen. And it says, at length upon the shepherd's mind it breaks and all is clear. It's just an understanding, like an epiphany of, what just happened. And he continues on to say that he actually remembered the traveler when he passed by the shepherd. He instantly recalled the name and who he was and whence he came. Remember, too, the very day on which the traveler passed this way. So it's just recalling back to when he actually, met the traveler.
And towards the last 2 stanzas, the poem goes from describing the story to actually the speaker now says I, saying I remember this. And this tale that he's telling, this story plot.
Right, and the tone changes just, from being very casual and nonchalant to, discovering the skeleton on the ground. But the way he describes the skeleton, it's very, he kind of blows it off a little bit, like it's not a big deal. He uses a lot of rhyming patterns just to, like found and ground, way and may, just to
kind of flow the poem better almost.
Exactly, to continue. And so you brush past it. But here, it becomes almost shocking. And it says, the dog, which was still hovering nigh, repeating the same timid cry, this dog had been through 3 months' space, a dweller in that savage place.
The dog had actually stayed there. The man died 3 months ago. The dog stayed by his side the entire time. And that draws back to Fidelity, the faithfulness of the animal.
And that's just kind of the turning point. Just the second tone change on how it goes to
the
just
realization
being
of what's
shocking.
Happening.
Exactly. And yes, proof that plain that since that day was when this ill-fated traveler died. The dog had watched about the spot or by his master's side. How nourished here through such long time, he knows who gave that love sublime, and gave that strength of feeling great above all human estimate. And he just talks about here, that last stanza, ties it back directly to the title Fidelity, and on how that this animal was so faithful and how he watched about his master even though he had died for 3 months, and how he survived in that environment, and how just the love that that animal had for his master was above human estimate, was above what we can create ourselves almost.
Right.
And that's just what Wordsworth was trying to show.
And what's actually interesting about this poem, that it's not just a poem. It's not just prose, a representation of...
or a point that he's trying to prove.
It was a true story, actually, which is so closely related to Wordsworth because he spent a lot of his time in an area called the Lake District, which is a beautiful scenic site where actually one of the poems that I chose about daffodils
was written
there. It's such a personal poem, and this yet again, he heard this story about a man, Charles Gough, who was a poet himself, who went out into the wilderness and fell from the rocks, and
fell from the cliff, and
his dog literally, actually, true story, stayed there with him. And Wordsworth was touched by this poem, or touched by this story, and through that he created this poem.
So this poem is a reflection on personal experience and just a story that he's heard, and it was just really interesting, just the way he managed to word it, and just use little rhymes and just took you along through it before hitting the shocking point of the story, is that the fact the dog had been there for 3 months.
So mainly it's just talking about the faithfulness, how it's such a
love bigger than we can comprehend.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's Fidelity by William Wordsworth.